How's everyone doing? Oh, I'm very loud. How is everyone? Because you're quiet in here today. How is everyone? You could be vocal in church. Just because it's a small room now, you think everyone can hear you. They can. We actually have microphones up here so they can hear you. I want to say, let's say hello to everyone at home. Hello, everyone at home. Because there's cameras in the room. We'll be streaming for our first time for months. We're going to be streaming Liberty Online as well for the folks who can't be here or who aren't comfortable coming into the room as well. So we're going to be streaming hopefully every week to Liberty Online, the messages as well. So I didn't have a message on Thursday night. Usually I'm a couple of months ahead, know what I'm going to be talking about, but it was Thursday night and I said to Jack, we were up here, I think, doing some work on something techie, and I was like, I don't know what I'm speaking about. Not a clue, which is unusual for me, and I went to bed that night, I was like, oh, it'll be fine, which is very unlike me. I'm a planner. I was like, it'll be fine. And I had the most vivid dream I think I've ever had in my life. It was so vivid, it was really weird. I was on the beach, or in the beach, on the beach, in the sea. So sort of the beach was wet. And so I was in the sea, by the beach with Steph and the family, in Portugal. Who's been to Portugal? Oh, a lovely place in my dream. I've never been. But in the dream, it was a lovely place. Awesome, lovely beach. I was in Portugal, never been before, don't know why Portugal. And we had a lilo, you know, the inflatable things that you should really not have in the sea. And I sat on it and I fell asleep, because I'm getting old. And so in my dream, when I'm asleep, I fell asleep. I know we're getting a bit Inception-y here. And I was dreaming away within my dream, within a dream. And then I woke up in my dream, not in real life. I know this is confusion, keep up. My wife hates Inception. She can't follow it. There's too many layers of story going on. But there's only two here, okay? So it's simple. I was asleep in a dream, and in that, I was asleep. I woke up from that dream, so I'm still asleep, and I'm still dreaming. So I fell asleep in Portugal in my dream, on the Lilo, and I woke up in a totally different place. Still in the sea, I was like washed up on a beach somewhere, but it looked completely different. The architecture was different. Everything was different about it. The people looked different. It was completely, there was no one around. My wife wasn't around. I was freaking out in my dream. And I drifted somewhere unexpected, unknown, and by accident. And so I went onto shore, and it was really vivid. I was running up and down the shoreline for hours trying to work out where I was. And I was asking everyone, where am I? Where am I? And they just laughed at me, which I thought was rather rude. But it turned out, eventually, I found out that I was in South Africa. So I was on the coast of South Africa. So I drifted along the coast 7,000 miles, as you do when you're having a nap. I drifted 7,000 miles all the way along the coast to South Africa. And it stirred in me this idea when I woke from my dream, my actual dream within a dream, within a dream. I woke up properly in real life, and I had this idea, this notion of drift stirred in me, the notion that we're easily, without meaning to, and when we're not paying attention, we can drift in life. We drift in life to places that are unexpected, unintended, and unwanted. And so I want to talk about this for 3 weeks. We're going to do a 3-week series, and we're just going to gently jump into it today, and hopefully we don't get carried away with it. And so, see, JP would have loved that pun. Where is he? Oh, he's in the kids. Oh. That is the level you get at this church of comedy. All right. So, but it got me thinking, I wonder who has the record for drifting out to sea. And it turns out it's a guy called Jose Salvador Alvarenga, and I'm probably savaging that name, that pronunciation, but he was out at sea at the end of 2012, and he spent 438 days drifting at sea. So he wasn't found until 2014. So he was over a year, from 2012 all the way... 2013 for him was just on a boat in the middle of the sea. That is ridiculous. And so I thought I had about 2013. But his fishing boat was blown off course in a storm, and then his motor cut out. And he was off the coast of Mexico. And he drifted, and I've got a picture here, he drifted 7,000 miles... which is funny because it's the same length in my dream, and I hadn't read this before, but 7,000 miles from the coast of Mexico all the way to the Marshall Islands, and one island particularly within that. But I think he swam the last bit. He saw land and swam, I believe. It was the story. I didn't read too much into it because obviously I didn't have much time because I only started it on Friday morning. And so, but what annoyed me is that he missed Hawaii by not that much, really. You'd be really annoyed if you're just like drifting past and you can see Hawaii, all the skirts in the background and stuff. You're like, oh! But he was drifting. The men wear skirts as well. That wasn't yeah. Aloha. Right. And so he had a companion with him, a 22-year-old, I think his name was Ezekiel, and sadly he died 4 months in. And actually, some people, when his family tried to sue him, that they thought he actually ate him on the journey, which sort of taints this story a little bit. But I don't believe that went through. They only tried to sue him after he had a book deal come out about the story. So who knows, maybe it was just a money grab sort of thing. But the point of the story was he was at sea drifting for such a long time, and he survived by eating fish, turtles, birds, sharks, and drinking rainwater. You know, who's seen Castaway where, what's his name, I've forgotten it. Tom Hanks, loved Tom Hanks. He was out at sea, and he was just floating around. You know, Wilson's done one, swam off somewhere else. And so I looked at when I was Googling this, just to read about it, the picture of the boat came up. And who can read this? Camaroneros de la Costa, which I think means, is that right? That's about right. I probably butchered that as well. But that means something along the lines of shrimp fisher, or seller of shrimp, or shrimp fisher. Yeah, Adair's telling me that's right, so that's good. But near to the coast. He spent a year in a boat as a shrimp seller with a label that said near to the coast. That would have just wound me up every day. I'd have had to scratch that off the outside. Or maybe he looked at it with hope. Maybe that's what pulled him through, who knows, and just waiting, drifting along. But the irony is funny. It made me laugh. But so this guy drifted longer and further than anyone else in the world, but it got me thinking about the simple truth that we are all at risk of drift. All of us. We're all at risk of drift. And perhaps even, and you might not agree with this, and that's cool, but I would say perhaps even our default is to drift. Our default is to just drift with the current. And so I was thinking about it, so often we end up in places we didn't plan. You know, if you've ever allowed Steph to drive somewhere on holiday, you end up places you'd not planned. Because Sat-Nav tells you to turn left, and she turns right. Just note that down, don't let Steph drive. But we end up in places that we don't plan or want or expect. And just because we allowed our life to drift unchallenged in the direction that the environment dictated, just like this guy, it was unchallenged. There was no motor on board to force in another direction. And so often in our life, we just drift along because we don't challenge the things, whether the environment is dictating the course of action. I think we've all drifted to places we didn't expect, and why is that? Again, because drifting is passive. Drifting is a passive thing. You don't have to do anything to drift. That bloke didn't have to do anything in that boat other than stay alive to drift a long way. But in the short term, he had to do nothing to drift. Absolutely no decisions. Just sit or lay. Drifting is passive. It's normal. I think it's default. It's easy. It's so easy. And drifting is what happens when we do nothing to stop the drift. I'd say we live in an environment where we're always in currents, always things pulling us in certain directions. And the default, the thing that's going to happen if you're passive is you will go in that direction unless you choose to do something about it to stop the drift. And I want you to think about this. Maybe you've ended up in really bad places in your life. Maybe really, really bad places, just personally or relationally or your relationship with God, however that is. I want to say this. You don't have to do anything really bad to end up somewhere really bad. You don't have to do anything really bad to end up somewhere really bad. You can just not stop the direction of travel, the drift toward that thing, whatever it is, that danger. I want you to think about this. In a river, if you just, in a river that's got a strong current or even just a weak current, if you just walk in, all you've got to do is just relax, if you're a swimmer, and lift your feet. Just relax. Lift your feet off the bottom, and you will move with the current. You just do nothing, and you naturally flow that way. And I think I shared a few months back when we were doing Liberty Online with our speed services. I started with my sister think it was in the winter before, so maybe a year and a half ago, I started doing cold water swimming with her. I went a couple of times to a lake and stuff. I didn't enjoy that as much. I liked the river. I liked it because it had a current. So I'd go in the winter. It was like the water would be like 4 degrees. I think my sister's gone down to 2 degrees. I'm like, it hurts. It's painful, but apparently it's good for you, because all things that are good for you really hurt. And so I'd get into the cold water, and it's really difficult. Getting in is the problem. You know the thing, guys, especially at the beach. There's a certain point in the getting in that's more difficult than others. Just leave it at that. And so once you're in, though, not too bad. But when it's really cold water, it's only 5, 10, 15 minutes before your body starts reacting in a way that's not very pleasant. And so what we used to do is we'd go in the river and we'd swim upstream. And the idea was just to try and stay at the same place. So we weren't trying to swim against the current. We were swimming against the current, but just stay where we are. And we'd swim 5, 7 minutes until both of us are like a bit knackered now. And then you just relax. And you'd go with the flow. And we'd flow downstream to a place we'd already placed our towels and shoes and all that sort of stuff. We'd flow all the way down there, just relaxing, just getting cold until we got there, and then we'd get out. And so, like I said, it's good for you. Try it. But the point is, the way we were doing it there, unlike swimming across a lake like some people do with cold water swimming, it was all about choosing to drift. It was drifting with the current, but we always choose to get out. We've always been predetermined we're going to get out. We don't just go, you know what, we'll just keep going, and end up in the ooze. Out, what is it? Where does the ooze end up? Yarmouth or something? I don't know. The Wells on Sea, isn't it? In the sea. We choose to get out. And so I think that's important, and we'll come back to that later, but maybe you can think of an area of life where you've drifted, in the natural or in the spiritual. It doesn't really matter. I think both are powerful things. But areas in life which we can easily drift, and this is one for me, definitely, and definitely over the last few months while I've been here working really long hours and not eating right and not going to the gym and stuff, is I can drift into putting on weight. Who's with me? It's so easy. If you're someone who's super skinny all your life and you've never had a problem with that, you don't understand. It's just like, just stop eating, fatso. That's what you think in your brain. You wouldn't say it because it's rude. But it's so easy, especially if you've already been big, to drift into putting on weight. Because all you've got to do is put in a tiny amount every single day or every single week, just that weekend, that day where you relax, and it can go on really quickly. And it has for me. I've put on at least 1.5 stone. I've got a weigh-in tomorrow. I'm not looking forward to it. But I can drift in that direction really easily. You can drift into unkindness from circumstances around you that have slowly made you bitter or resentful or frustrated. You can drift into being unkind. You can drift into being a moaner. You can drift easily into gossip. Isn't that easy? When other people are, you can get caught in the tide of someone gossiping and being pulled into that rip current. You can drift into laziness. Even if you're someone who's not naturally like that, you can drift into indifference, into apathy of like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. Maybe this one will hit home more. You can drift into your overdraft. I think it should be called an overdrift. Because it's so easy. I remember there was a time in our life when we were having a particularly difficult time, and I'm in charge of the finances because Steph's like, you do it, I don't want to, and I'm happy to. And so I do that, and I didn't keep my eye on the finances for about 4 months. And it was just little chipping away, like just 20 quid here, 10 pound. And it was like, we were like 700 quid overdrawn, which for some of you, that's like, oh, that's nothing. But for us, it's not. It's like, it's a zero sum. We're like, we get to zero at the end of the month. That's the rules. And so I was 700 pound overdrawn. I was like, what? I'm like, I didn't swim there. I didn't swim there. I didn't choose to enter that race. I didn't plonk into the pool thinking I'll do the 700 pound swim. I slowly drifted toward that because I wasn't paying attention, because I wasn't focusing, because I wasn't choosing, because I wasn't being active. And maybe many of you have done the same. You can drift away from routine. You can drift into busyness of activities that draw you away from God, that are not helpful. You can drift slowly into ill health, just over decades, because of the way you're treating your body or even your soul. You can drift into bad habits. You can drift even back into bad habits that you'd already put away and overcome. You can drift away from friends. You can drift away from your spouse. You can drift away from love. And I want you to think about this, that nobody sets out thinking, you know, I'm going to sabotage my own life. I'm bored with this life that I like. I'm going to sabotage it just for fun. No one does that. No one sets out to sabotage their relationships. No one sets out to sabotage their faith. But by allowing yourself to drift, that is what will eventually happen. If you allow yourself to drift in areas of life unchallenged, that is what eventually happens. And I put it like this: if you continue to allow yourself to drift, you will eventually suffer loss. Just like if you're out at sea, just if you're in a river, if you just allow yourself to drift, eventually, you might be fine for ages. When I go in the water with my sister, I can handle about 15 minutes. And it's fine. And I feel good. You get out, feel refreshed. Your brain's like buzzing, it's like, woo! But can I tell you, if I allowed myself to drift any further, can I tell you, I would suffer loss. I would die. Literally, I'm a strong swimmer, but give it another 10 minutes, my body would shut down. And it's no different in any area of life where you allow your environment or people to allow you to drift in a direction that God's not called you to go in. You will eventually, if you don't do anything about it, suffer loss, whatever that looks like. With the cold water swimming, I had to make a choice. At some point, I'm going to fight the current. At some point, I'm going to put my foot down. At some point, I'm putting my foot down and saying, I ain't drifting anymore because this is the time I get out. And maybe for you, there's some areas in life where you need to stop drifting in that direction and put your foot down and choose to get out of that current, or choose to swim back against the current to get where you're supposed to be. Perhaps today it's your time to take some control of the direction of some of the parts of your life that you need to take a hold of and steer instead of drifting. Maybe you need to put your foot down. Because I want you to think about it. We all drift. It's default. It's easy. It's passive. But I want you to think about it, because we can all do it so easily. I want you to think about this, that we rarely drift somewhere better. It might happen by occasion, on occasion, that you might drift just by happen chance. You might just drift if you just don't engage, and you might end up somewhere better. You know, like if you get in at Yarmouth in a dinghy, you might by chance drift to the south of France and get out. I'm not saying France is better than Yarmouth if you're from Yarmouth in here. But you know, there is a small chance that you might drift somewhere better. You might drift up the coast to Lowestoft, much nicer place. Although it is in Suffolk. But you see what I'm saying? That generally speaking, we rarely drift somewhere better. And it's exactly the same in your life. Whatever area of your life that you allow drift in, you will rarely drift anywhere better. So by default, you'll be in a worse place, a worse position. And so some of you are thinking, okay, on to the Bible. I'm getting there, don't worry. In every area, in every environment, there are currents, a direction of travel, pushing you in a particular direction. Pressures from life, whether that's the river of your workplace or if it's the ocean of your family home. It doesn't matter what there is. There's tides and currents pulling you in particular directions. There's a constant, I put it like this, I like alliteration, constant currents of culture. There's just, in our culture, there's constant currents of culture moving in a particular direction, and most of us just get swept along with it, just keeping your head down, just shut up, and we'll talk about that in the weeks to come. But without purposeful, directed energy and focus, you will just drift in whatever direction the environment dictates. Whatever your workplace culture dictates, if you do nothing about it, you'll just drift in that direction and be the same as everyone else. You know, maybe some of you have drifted along during COVID in so many ways, you know, with lockdowns, with isolation from others. And you're probably feeling the effects of it if you have been drifting, even if you don't acknowledge them in your mind. Perhaps you've even drifted from your faith. Perhaps you've drifted in your zeal for God, for church. Maybe you've drifted away from purpose. Maybe even drifted away from love. Drifted from friendships. Maybe even drifted for your love for Jesus. And the reason I bring this up is because Paul wrote this letter to the Colossians, and I'm just going to take a snippet today, and maybe we'll expand on it in future weeks. But Colossians 1, 21 to 23 says this. I'm reading from the NLT, and Paul's just been describing how Christ is supreme over everything else. And it says this. This includes you, like what he'd just been talking about. This includes you who were once far away from God. And that's me. I was once far away from God. I accepted who Jesus Christ was, and that's cool. But it includes you who were once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions. Yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. All right? And every Christian knows that that's part of the deal, if you like. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. Amen. But Everyone say but. You just all said but. But you must continue to believe this truth. You must, check it, Paul's not messing around. He's saying, you already know this. You are far from God. You understand how you're one with God and you're now blameless in his sight. But you must continue to believe this truth. You can't drift away from that truth. You must continue to believe this truth. Check it, this truth. And stand firmly in it. Not lift your feet and get drifted along with any wind of teaching or doctrine or culture current. Is that you stand firm. You put your feet down in your river and you say, I'm standing on this truth. He says this, don't drift away. Don't drift away from the assurance you received when you heard the good news. The good news has been preached all over the world, and I, Paul, have been appointed as God's servants to proclaim it. And there's a similar thing in Hebrews 2, verse 1. It says this, and I like the way it put it, because it spoke to me in terms of the language. It says this, we must pay the most careful attention. We must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. The writer's saying here that if you don't pay careful attention, the likelihood is you will drift away. So pay careful attention so that you do not drift away. And I love the fact that the Bible's really open and honest about the dangers and likelihood of drifting. It's like, that's the default. That's what's going to happen. Unless you purposefully pay careful attention and choose to stand firmly. Because some of you might, I was thinking about this just on the way here, actually. Because, some of you might be thinking, oh, no, drifting's cool. And you're getting confused with coasting. That's very different. Who coasts in the car when they shouldn't? Clutch down. Just keep coasting. It's fine. And coasting is different. Coasting is you're not putting any energy into the car. You put the clutch down and you're just rolling, going with the flow. But you're still steering. You're not putting any energy in. You're just going with the flow, but you can coast along. And many of us do that. And drifting is very different. Drifting is not having any control. You're being sucked in a direction that you don't even want to go in. Coasting is just being lazy sometimes. And we can all do that. I'm not really talking about that. But my point being is perhaps you have drifted far from where you want to be. Far from your goal weight. Far from your relationship goals. Far from even God. Maybe you've drifted far from where God wants you to be, and you know it. I want to say, guess what? You're not alone. You're not alone. The Bible's really clear about it. Like, be careful. It's just going to happen unless you're paying attention. You're not alone. Remember, drifting is easy. Drifting is by default. But we can choose to get out the river. When we notice we're far from land. And this is a great opportunity, because I'm speaking here. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm not like some oracle of knowledge. It's just let's just bring in something front and center and saying, here's an opportunity in your life now to make some decisions about things you already know. And so when you notice that you're far from land, when you acknowledge, actually, I've drifted in this area of my life, you have an opportunity to make a decision, to make an effort to get back to shore, in whatever that looks like for you. I've told this story before when I was in Cornwall. And I love bodyboarding. Used to try surfing. I was very heavy, like 18 stone. I was like, what's the point? Even the big longboards still sink when I get on them. And I wasn't particularly agile on my left with my left foot. But bodyboarding I loved. And I went out on this day, and the waves were quite big sometimes, but they were sporadic. Just every now and again, a big wave would come, and then there was like lots of medium waves. And I'm not bothered about the medium waves. I'm like, if I'm going in, I'm going and get a big wave. That's what I'm doing. And so I was paddling out. Took ages to get through all the medium-sized waves, and I was waiting out there for ages for a big wave. And I'm like, there was one night, I saw 2 or 3 on the way out. They're breaking right there. And so I'm sat there waiting, facing out to sea, because that's what you do. If you face the shore, you get smashed. When a wave comes up behind you. You're facing the sea, you're waiting. When you see one, you turn and pivot on your board, you kick like crazy, and you try and catch it. And I was out there for ages, what felt like ages. Maybe it was only 7 or 8 minutes, I don't know. But at one point, I'm staring at the waves, and then at one point I look back, and I'm like, oh no! And I was so far from the furthest I've been from shore, like that I'd ever been from shore, even on a ferry, I reckon. And I was so far from shore, I actually panicked inside, and I'm a strong swimmer. And I'm like, I think there might be a riptide. I think I might be caught in a current here. I think I might have been being sucked out to sea, and I really panicked. And I was like, oh no. And what I had to do is make a decision. Rather than, you know what, I'm going to wait here for a big wave. No. I'm I'm going to wait here for a big wave because that's what I desire. Rather than just carry on waiting and drifting, I made a decision when I acknowledged how far I was away from the shore, how far I was away from safety, how far away from where I am designed to be as a human is to be on dry land. We go in the sea and we get confused that we were in trouble. And God's like, what are you doing? I didn't give you gills. And so that's where I'm supposed to live, to get back to where God's designed me to be. It's when you see you're far from land, you make a choice. And maybe you know there's an area you've drifted and you're way, way away from the shore. And you have to make a concerted effort to get back. So I had to turn, and I swam and paddled as hard as I could on my board. And I was going nowhere, obviously. I was going backwards probably. But I was trying as hard as I could. And every little tiny bit of wave I could get, I caught back in until I got a medium-sized wave. It took me a little way and then died. And then I'm still panicking. And then a big wave came, yay! And it took me all the way to shore. And I was like, I'm getting out. Didn't like that. But when you realize you're a long way off, you got the opportunity and the choice to say, you know, I refuse to drift anymore. And for me in the past, you know, I drifted into 19 stone in weight. It took 4 or 5 years to get there, but it was a drift all the way up there. It wasn't my plan, it wasn't my intention. I've drifted in the past into working longer hours than I should. And in doing so, I've drifted away from God. I've drifted into following the expectations of others. But when I put my head up and noticed how far I was from shore, I made a decision. I've got a paddle to get back to where I need to be. And you may have drifted in an area, whatever that is, whether that's spiritual, away from God, or in a physical or social regard, whether it's with friendships, whatever it is, whether it's with church and being connected. You may have drifted, and you may be even a long way off and feel a long way off, but I want to say it's not too late to be found, it's not too late to be rescued, and it's not too late to actively choose to paddle in the right direction. It's not too late to actively choose to not drift anymore, but to set sail in the direction that Jesus is calling you, whatever that is. It may mean hoisting a sail, it may mean turning into the wind, it may mean paddling for a bit really hard, and it might be tough. But you know that you can't carry on drifting. You know it. So while you're still in sight of land, I want to say paddle the way you know you should go and catch the first wave you can. And in a way, maybe today, me just speaking about this is offering you a wave, a window to make a choice in an area you know you are drifting and decide to put your foot down and to get out of the river. And I want to say, don't beat yourself up for drifting, because it happens to everyone. The Bible talks about it. But just choose to actively start heading in the direction that Jesus is calling you in, wherever that is. And I think together as a church, it's time for us to set sail. Whether you're in the room or if you're listening at home, it's time to set sail to the destination that God's calling us as an individual, but us as a church. To stop drifting along with the currents of culture, but actively build his kingdom on this earth as it is in heaven, to build his local church here in Thetford and build our lives together on him. And so I ask you, if you've drifted in an area of life, if you've got that in your mind, or maybe you've got a few, I want to ask you, please, will you choose to get back on course? Choose to get back on course. Because like I said, we rarely drift to anywhere better. And if we continue to allow ourselves to drift in any area of life, you will eventually suffer loss. And so my question really is, do you need to stop drifting? We're going to pick this up next week. Let's just pray. Father, I just thank you.